Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Carter. I'm an application engineer with Ally PLM Solutions. I want to welcome you to the third installment of Ally PLM Lunch Bytes series. Today we're going to be looking at large assembly performance tools. There's going to be more than what we're going to talk about today, but we want to get an introduction and some ideas, some of those tools that we can use to lighten up those large assemblies. If you guys have joined Lunch Bytes before, you know that the series is designed to briefly explore the capabilities within Solid Edge that are often overlooked or maybe we need an introduction to. Future sessions will be delivered every other Thursday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. If you guys have signed up before, you know that we're open to suggestions, so please send those suggestions via email. Also, we have a large attendee list. And because of everybody's speakerphones and whatnot, we do have everyone muted. So if you guys have a question about today's session, please note that and send that to us in an email, and you will see contact information at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. So like I said, today's session is on large assembly tools, and just kind of a brief agenda. I made a slide here just so you see what we're going to talk about. We want to talk about how we can open up large assemblies really fast. So let's look at the File Open dialog box. We're going to look at display configurations, whether an assembly or a subassembly or whatever level is active, inactive, whether those parts are hidden and shown, and how we can actually create display configurations to map those. We're going to look at being able to group parts in the assembly pathfinder, maybe shorten up that tree a little bit. We're going to look at a fast locate option. We're going to look at simplifying parts and also simplifying assemblies, so both levels there. And towards the end, we want to look at opening those large assembly drafts in active and what we get in active versus what we have to do in active mode. And finally, a new tool in ST2 we want to look at is the accelerated sketch display. So I have a couple PowerPoint slides. What we want to do is look at the File Open dialog box. So let's just go right into Solid Edge. And if I go to the Open dialog box and I highlight the assembly, you see that we have some options over here. And by default, when you load ST2, you're going to get a result like that. You're going to see Apply Activation Override to Parts, and it's set to Inactivate All. Apply Simplify Override to Parts, Use All Simplified for the part level, and also Simplify Override to Subassemblies, Use All Simplified. So that's what it's going to look like out of the box. So if you've opened ST2 and you're wondering why all my parts are inactivated all, that's why. It's applying that override as you open the assembly. So we're going to look at, and this would, if you think about it, this would be the lightweight format to open the assembly. All the parts are going to be inactive. And what I mean by inactive and active is, and I'll show you in a shortcut menu here shortly, but activated means that at the assembly level, we have all the part geometry, how the faces are, all the math behind those faces are loaded to memory at the assembly level. If we have them inactivated, that math behind those faces is not loaded at the assembly level. However, you notice that your constraints and you physically see the part, and as far as your assembly, typical, how it's constrained, how it's sitting there, that's not going to affect anything. The other option that you may not be aware of is this hide all components. So if we hide all components, that's going to instantly open up the structure, and then we can show different subassemblies, different areas of assembly that we need to work on as we proceed. The other thing that you may or may not be familiar with is the configuration down here, and we're going to explain display configurations in just a little bit. But on the File Open, I can open to a certain display configuration which maps whether these parts are active, these parts are inactive, hidden, shown, etc. So let's go ahead and hide all components. Let's go ahead and open up this assembly you saw in the preview. And notice how it instantly opens up. Nothing's shown, but I have access right to my assembly pathfinder. So I can come in here, I can expand down into different subassembly levels. If I want to come in here to this particular subassembly, I can say, hey, I want to display that or show all that. And what I'm doing is picking on the areas where I actually want to do my work. And we're going to talk about more tools as we proceed to that. Let me go back to the PowerPoint for 1 second. And we want to talk about display configuration. So while we're starting to talk about show, hide, and I mentioned active and inactive, we also want to talk about how we can map those throughout our assembly. Maybe we're going to be working on as you see in the screenshot, the image processing unit. So maybe that's the subassembly and some components around that. We want to be able to display those. So let's take a look at display configurations. Right now I've shown this entire assembly. Let's say that I want to go down another level. Let's actually in-place activate and edit into this particular memory unit subassembly. So now at the top of Solid Edge you see memory underscore unit in the top level assembly. So I am in the context of the assembly. If I come down and I want to display certain parts, hide and show and things that we are somewhat familiar with, I would think. If we want to show only and just display this plate, the other way I could have got to that is by having a display configuration. So let me go back and display all these parts to show all. And you'll see up here is where my display configurations are listed. So if I hit this drop down, you can say, hey, I need to work on that back plate. So I have a display configuration set up, and you see how it's displayed that plate. How do I create my own display configurations? Let me go back and show all those components. And let's say I want a display configuration with all those components shown. Not only is it hide show, but it's also keeping in fact whether these parts are active or inactive. So if I come down here and you see the plug bracket PSM on the left, I can right click and activate that. What that means is now the math behind the faces of the plug bracket is loaded to memory inside of this particular assembly. So you see the little orange block. That means it's active, plus it's shown. So to create a display configuration with that, I can go to the Configurations tool, and maybe I just want to give it a name. We'll just call it Memory Unit. And I can save that to the list. These other options below here, whenever we select one of these display configurations to turn on these components, hide, show, etc., you see that there are also there's activation overrides as well. So we can activate all the parts, inactivate all the parts, or maintain the current state of the assembly. We can also do the same thing with the simplify overrides, and we'll talk about simplified parts and simplified assemblies coming up. One thing is you see at the bottom is there's a location for the configuration file. So you see netcommunicationmachine.cfg, and that CFG has the same name as the assembly. So some of you may wonder, oh, what's that CFG file always tagging along with my assemblies? Why is that created? Well, this is one of the things that is stored there. You see that all our display configurations are stored there, and that file is very important. All right, so I'm going to close this out. Right now I have the memory unit, that display configuration I just created. I can go to my drop down. If I want to work between the plate configuration, I can quickly switch that. The parts will turn on and off with that display configuration. If I want to go back to my memory unit, I can quickly grab those as well. So the point is you can set up display configurations and quickly maneuver, turn on and off, activate and inactivate components throughout your assembly and work on this particular area of the assembly, this particular area of the assembly, and so forth. The next thing we want to talk about is grouping components. So when we get a large assembly, whether we have several sub-assemblies, and in those sub-assemblies we have several components, we may want to group those in a group. And don't confuse groups with sub-assemblies. A group is just kind of a folder, or if you will, a collection of those components. So what it allows us to do is group them together, and at the same time it shortens our tree, if you will, our part tree. So what we're going to do is select the parts we want to group, and then group those. And for a good example is maybe I want to group several fasteners together. So let's take a look at this. So in this memory unit subassembly, you see I have several screws, screw 2 in the size and the name. And if you see those, there's just the little tiny screws that are putting this little plate, this little cover on there, etc. So if I want to group all those together, I can just select the range, hold down select or control, just like you're picking folders inside of Windows. I can right click and say group. So now you see I have a generic assembly group header. Maybe I want to rename that to give that something, recognize that a little more. Maybe I'll call it screw 2, just part of the name that was at that assembly group. And what can I do with those assembly groups? I can select a group. I can say select components. You can see them highlighted on the screen, the ones I grouped in green there. I can also right click and say hide. I want to hide them quickly. I want to show them. And I can also use that to activate and inactivate. So that's also another way for us to help set up our display configurations. If I don't want those grouped anymore, it's just a simple right click, ungroup, and they'll go back in the same order they were previously to how I grouped them. You see them all together there. The other thing I want to point out is the some selection tools. For example, if I select something on here, some tools that help us grab other parts so we don't have to pick one part one by one, you see I have this support highlighted on the screen, and we have some selection tools. I can do a selection box, so I can basically draw a 3D volume and it'll prompt you for that. I can do select identical parts, so if I want to select identical parts, notice how the other support highlights so that I can hide, show, activate, inactivate, etc. Let's go back to the original. I have tools that I can select subassembly parts, so if they match to other occurrences identical in the selected subassembly, I can grab those. I can select small parts, so if I'm wanting to hide a bunch of my fasteners, this small parts, you see part size, think of this as a slider bar. As I increase the number, it's going to start highlighting larger and larger parts. You can see that those fasteners are already highlighted. Now brackets are starting to turn green with the selection, and I can use that as my select set. So I just wanted to point out some of those tools there to help us select parts. The next thing we want to talk about is fast locate. So with fast locate, this is an option, and this also depends on some of our hardware and what type of graphics card, whether we have a Cadillac graphics card or something cheap. But you've probably noticed, or at least some of you noticed for the large assembly, as I move my cursor across and it's trying to highlight those faces, sometimes it's slow to get the feedback, meaning the graphics is slow. So we can turn on fast locate, and it won't paint those faces. It will create kind of a box selection, what you see in the slides. Let's take a look at that. I also want to back up, and let's go ahead and go up to a larger subassembly here. And I want to just show and turn on the display of this entire CPU subassembly. And what you'll see, we're going to display all those components, and then you see all the little like a electronic circuit board in there, resistors and capacitors and so forth. And I want to actually do some work in there. We're going to do some work in there in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and in-place activate into that particular subassembly. So once I've in-place activated, you'll see we're in CPU subassembly in the top level. And what I wanted to show you is the fast locate. So this is the default out of the box. As you see, as I highlight my cursor over top of these parts, how the faces want to paint. So meaning every face, every piece of that face is highlighted. Well, if we don't have the best graphics card, or maybe one of those cheap gaming cards that we need to stay away from, that could be slow depending on the card. So if I come up to our solid edge options, and on the assembly tab, you will see an option called fast locate, display for parts and also for subassemblies, and also whenever you're over top of Pathfinder. While I'm here, I want to point out another option. You see that there's inactivate hidden and unused components whatever time you set. So for example, if I activate part 1, part 2, part 3, and I haven't touched it for say 20 minutes, with this option selected, it'll go ahead and inactivate that and free up some memory for you. So keep in mind that option, that option as well. So I've turned on the fast locate, and now you'll see when I highlight that part, notice how it's not trying to paint the faces, it's just doing a box selection. So it's still highlighting the part, it's still picking the part, it's just not trying to use all the graphics and paint those faces. So keep that in mind as well. The next thing we want to talk about making our assemblies even lighter. So we're going to look at simplified parts, and then we're going to look at simplified assemblies. So we're going to look at simplifying our geometry at multiple levels. On the left, you see just a simple plate, and maybe for what we're going to do here with this, in this case, maybe those holes, that hole pattern in the center is just for letting air out, for heat reduction or whatever the case may be. And for our assembly, that's not necessarily important. For details, obviously at the part level it's important, but maybe it's not important for the assembly. And on the right, you see a simplified version. So we're going to look at how to create a simplified version of a part. So I'm going to pick on this back plate back here, this rear panel. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up just in its own part environment. I could have edited in-place activated in it. That's fine. You'll notice I have my tree over here, my list of features. And right now I am working with the traditional file. So if I go to Tools, you'll notice that Simplify is available there. And when I click Simplify, it's going to go into the Simplify environment. and you'll notice that I'm going to have kind of a separate section of my history tree where I have a simplified version of that. And how do we create a simplified version? We can use our direct editing tools. So if I go down here to things like move face and delete region and so forth, those are my direct editing tools. So I'm going to use a tool called delete faces, and I want to clean up the cutouts and have a simplified version of those. I'm just going to window select those. Maybe I want that cutout to be gone as well, and I'm just basically deleting those faces. And because I was in the simplified area, if you will, of the part, and I've created a simplified version, you see delete faces there. And now on my tools, I can switch back between the design model and the simplified model. So let's go ahead and save that, and let's see how we can use that in the assembly. So notice here the rear panel, notice how it's activated, it has the little block showing it's a part. If I right click on that, I can now say I want to use the simplified version. So I can use simplified part. If you notice before and after that those cutouts are gone. Now I still have the shapes for these for constrained, these pin locators and the plugs and so forth, but you see that the geometry, it's a simplified version of that. Also you'll notice that anytime we have simplified, it has this little blue triangle on the icon there. So we now have a simplified part in this particular subassembly. The next thing we want to take a look at is actually looking at simplified assemblies. So simplified assembly is really cool. I want to show you a few different things you can do. On the left we see the example of the designed with all those small components on the back, all the small components on the inside, and we see the simplified version on the right. So when doing this, it's very, very similar workflow. We're going to go to Tools. We're going to go, say I want to create a simplified version of this subassembly, and you'll see a tool called Create. So if I click Create, first of all, I just want to show you the options and what they mean. On the unprocessed color, you see the default screen, which means I haven't processed, and I'll explain what that is in a second. But what it's going to find is, one, do we want to exclude parts, which will be highlighted in blue? Do we want to calculate the exterior faces, interior faces, and you see the corresponding colors. So let's go ahead and process this, and what process is going to do, it's going to find those exterior faces and the interior faces, and what it's doing is creating a kind of surfaces, and what it's going to do is simplify it to kind of a part body, if you will. Right now you see it's taking the outside geometry of that and said that's what's going to be our simplified body. We can also tweak these results. So you'll notice this exclude parts over here. This is kind of like a small part slider. So I can increase that number, and as I increase the number, just like we did with the small part slider when we were selecting parts earlier, you notice more and more parts are turning blue. So larger parts, and if I increase this, you'll see the plug turn blue over there as well. I can also graphically select parts to omit those from the simplified body, and you see that everything in blue is going to be taken away as well. So I'm going to preview and go ahead and generate that simplified assembly, and you'll see now underneath CPU assembly I have a simplified version of that, and once again there's that little blue triangle showing me that is a simplified version. A couple other tools here, we're talking about simplifying it for large assembly purposes, but another tool that comes up every once in a while, questions from our users, is how do I save out this sub-assembly or even the top-level assembly without giving all of my intellectual properties to my customer? We always get that call from a customer, say, hey, I buy this off of you, can I have a CAD model to put in my plant layout? Well, this would be the way we do that. We can simplify it. We can get the outer structure of this, which we did with the simplify the process there, and also we could exclude some other parts, some other intellectual property from that. And right here from the simplified assembly you see a save as, and I can save that straight to a part file, or I can push that out as a neutral format to pair solid. So just to point that out. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I've created my simplified assembly. Let's go ahead and back out that level, and now just like we did before, I can right click and say, hey, I want to use that simplified version. And there I did it one case by one case. Now you see it's simplified, it's real lightweight, and we can manipulate that a lot easier. The other thing we couldn't do from the top level is we can right click and say simplify. I want to use all simplified parts. use all simplified assemblies, etc. And that's kind of what we did on the file open, where we said open and do the override to use simplified parts in simplified assemblies. So if we don't do that, we can do that afterwards by right-clicking on either the subassembly or in this case the top-level assembly, either way. All right, let's go ahead and take this one step farther, and let's talk a little bit about drafting with these simplified assemblies and so forth. Well, I want to point out a couple options in the drawing view wizard that you may or may not have noticed. So if I go to my drawing view wizard, and let's go ahead and throw this guy in there. There was a preview of the simplified top body. I forgot to show you that. And in the drawing view wizard, you see that we can also use those simplified bodies on the drawing. So that also makes our assembly drawing lightweight as well. So I can use simplified assemblies for all sub-assemblies. Maybe I had a simplified version of each one of those sub-assemblies. I do it based on a particular display configuration, or I have one that for the top level assembly there. I can also use simplified parts. And let's just go ahead and throw an isometric view out there. And you see that this is simplified, and I can still get the outer integrity of my assembly. I can pull off dimensions, and if I zoom in around the model edges, you see it's not missing anything unless I specifically told it to exclude those parts on simplification. While we're talking about large assemblies and maybe even drawing performance, I want to talk to you about opening a draft inactive. This was new with version 20, and maybe we just want to pop open a draft file to maybe to print it, to review it, maybe do a little bit of dimensioning. You'll notice if you've paid attention that there's an inactive drawing view for the review. And like I said, that's just kind of an inactive way of opening it. It's going to give you a watermark. So let's take a look at that. If I open up this drawing, I'm going to inactivate the drawing views for review, so that's lightweight, so to speak. I'm going to open that up, and what that's doing is just keeping it light by not necessarily opening the assembly in the background. So you'll notice that, and I actually kept this, not that this is very practical, but you see I kept the hidden lines and kept it very, very heavy. And you notice that it has an inactive watermark showing you that you open it inactive. And you'll notice that tools like update views are ghosted out, and the reason being is because we don't have the assembly loaded in memory. And I'll show you in a minute how if we need something loaded in memory, it's very easy to do. So with these 2D views, I can come down here, go ahead and place dimensions, because I already have my views. Just to give you an idea of that, I can annotate my drawings. Like I said, I could come up and print those if I just wanted to print it, just do a quick print. And like I said, I didn't necessarily want or need to load the assembly to the background. If I do need the assembly to be activated, for example, I'm going to dimension this ISO. I get a message saying, hey, I need to look at the model, so you just need to activate that. So just quickly here, you see that I can go Tools and activate the drawing views, and then that will load that to memory. All right, a couple things to follow up here, or to finish up here. I have another tool I mentioned when we talked about the agenda, new with ST2, is Accelerated Sketch Display. So maybe we have this large mammoth sketch we brought in from another source, or maybe you sketched it, or whatever the case may be, and we want to get a little bit of performance, a little bit better performance with that. So let's go ahead and go back to Solid Edge, and I'm going to open this this particular assembly. It just has a sketch, and what we're going to notice is that when this sketch comes in, it has different line types, it has different line thicknesses, different colors, and it's making it heavy, right? So, and bear with me here over the web. I don't know if you can see me rotate this, but what I'm going to try to do is, if I hold my middle mouse button down and rotate that, it's choppy. And I apologize, it's probably choppy because of the web as well. But if I come in and select the assembly, browse down to the assembly, or I'm sorry, the sketch, and I want to right-click on that, and I have multicolor, which it is, and like I said, new with ST2 is Accelerated Sketch Display. So it's going to display the sketch in a single color and a solid line type. So in a sense, it's kind of making it lightweight, just generally speaking. And what you're going to notice is that I can rotate that around, and it's very lightweight. All right, so to summarize what we talked about today, we can use active and inactive simplified parts / assemblies to lighten your assembly. And also on the File Open dialog box, we can combine that with hide all components to instantly open your assembly and then show and activate the certain parts of your assembly that you're going to be working on to help keep memory free. We can set up display configurations to help map that, whether a part's active, inactive, shown, or hidden. We can open your assembly drawings in Active to view and print, and we can also do some dimensioning on those 2D views. If we need to go ahead and activate the assembly, there's a tool right there called on Tools menu to activate it, and it will load the assembly to memory. And finally, with ST, we have a tool called Accelerated Sketch Display to speed up the assembly sketch performance. As most of you know now, if you're new to Lunch Bytes, we do put a replay of this up on our YouTube channel. That's at youtube.com/AllyPLM. If you guys have any suggestions for future Lunchbyte topics, please let us know those. Send those via email. If you guys have any questions for our tech support team, let us know. There's our contact information once again. And if you had any questions specifically about today's session, please let us know. Send those via email, and we will follow up with you. I want to thank everybody for their time, and have a great afternoon.